From being the finance manager at Marks and Spencer's, he joined ASOS journey where he primarily was responsible for ASOS international expansion. He succeeded so well that 60% of ASOS sales came from other countries. Today he's a guest of Klarna, where he is a board member. Welcome on stage, Mr. Jon Kamaluddin. Welcome back, Jon. You were here 2010. Yes, it was a long time ago. Nick Robertson and Quentin Griffiths formerly founded a scene on screen in June 2000. Can you tell us how you got in contact with them, and why it was interesting to working together with them?
So I got a phone call from a headhunter. The first CFO of ASOS had decided that the company had got to a size and scale where he was no longer enjoying it, and had resigned. So I got a phone call from a headhunter. Have you heard of ASOS? I said yes. Well, would you like to go and meet the founder as they're looking for a new CFO? Q had left the business at that point, and funnily enough, I've only met Q face to face in the last 12 months. Not quite sure why, but we got on very well. But Nick is a very quick decision maker, so he pretty much offered me the job on the spot, subject to references. And so I started a few weeks later. That was back in August 2004.
So if you would say one thing, why was it so interesting for you? I mean, you had a great job at Marks and Spencer.
At Marks and Spencer, I'd worked on new projects, and I'd worked on the launch of a brand called Peruna, which was developed by a guy called George Davis, who was the man who founded Next, I'm sure most people have heard of. And that was my first experience of working. This one's working, yeah. It stopped working for a moment. And that was my first experience of working for an entrepreneur, and it's addictive. And so, that's how I wanted to spend the next few years of my career. And I was actively looking for opportunities in small, fast-growing businesses.
A lot of e-commerce stores had problem with their business back in 2000. Why do you think ASOS succeeded so well?
I think there were two reasons. Number one, we weren't as ambitious with what we were trying to do as some of the other players. And the technology just wasn't there, broadband speeds weren't there, people were still on dial-up, and people were developing fancy sites with moving images. And they were also over-ambitious with the scale they could get to, and so those businesses were burning through cash at an enormous rate. For ASOS, our sort of ambitions in those early days were much more modest. We just wanted to actually get to profitability. And the other reason I think we were successful was the timing, because launching in 2000, so the money was there for, the seed capital was there to start the business, but then by 2001, when the dot-com bubble burst, the money was no longer there. And so the choice was either find a way to profitability, and it wasn't actually profitability, it was cash flow break even that we were trying to get to. So you either get to that point and survive, or you don't get to that point and you fail. And so the timing, I think if the business had been launched 2 years earlier, I think it probably would have gone the same way as others, where it had raised too much money, been over ambitious, and try and launch a product before the world was ready for it.
Do you remember the very first time ASOS seriously considered to enter the Nordic market?
It was fortuitous. I mean, we were, I have to confess, accidental entrants into the Nordic market. We, at the time, were using Royal Mail as the carrier, and they said, well, we can ship anywhere in the world. So we did. We were prepared to take orders from anywhere. And in those early years, and this always surprised me, our three biggest countries outside of the UK were and this is not in order, Ireland, Sweden and Denmark. I always understood Ireland because of the proximity and the same language, but Sweden and Denmark were always a surprise to me, and for many years those were our biggest markets.
Did you do any custom fits for the Nordic markets on the site?
In those days, nothing. We did some affiliate marketing, and that was it. And yet these markets grew to reasonable scale from the UK. And I think it goes back to the earlier point. One of the reasons for ASOS's success by about 2001, 2002, 2003, well, we were the only people left at the party. There was no one else. And so I think as people were, I think, from my experience, the Swedes and the Danes are very international in their outlook, and so I think the customers here were looking for something, and the only place they could find it was ASOS. And if you go back to those days, we had a celebrity link, so every single product was as seen on someone. So there was a really powerful marketing hook in those early days, which appealed to customers not just in the UK but further afield.
The Nordic market consists of 5 small countries with various customs and VAT rules and various languages, sparsely populated in rather large area. How did ASOS approach these challenges?
This is all so much easier now. In the early days of the internet, the carriers were either slow and cheap. This was all around letters and small packets, and low-value items, untracked services. Really not a great customer experience. And on the other end of the scale, you had fast and expensive, and these were the services developed by DHL and UPS and FedEx, which were all around moving, important documents from A to B for signature, and for moving, small numbers of expensive items that were time critical around. And so they developed very fast and expensive services. And there was nothing that sat in the middle in those days. And so back then it was what I called, and this is an English expression, it was spray and pray. You'd send it in the post and just hope it got there. And in the EU, that was kind of okay. It was much more difficult when you're crossing a customs threshold, and that's when it would often go wrong, and the customer would be phoned up for duty, or it would just disappear, and you'd have no idea where the parcel had gone. Now it's so much easier. There are all of the big carriers and the national networks are geared up for e-commerce parcel delivery, and they're all getting better and better and better at cross-border shipping. So it's just so much easier now.
And what about warehouses? What was your idea about that? Closer to the market, or?
So in common with a lot of successful pure-play e-commerce businesses, our range was very broad and very shallow. That meant it was just uneconomic to recreate the inventory in multiple places around the world. And so we had no choice but to get good at moving things cross-border. I think when we first properly embarked on the international adventure, it would have cost something like £55 million to recreate the stock in another market. And so I think the decision comes down to what your stock profile looks like, and if you're lucky enough to have a narrow and deep product range, I think you can go local in market and have inventory in country or close to country much earlier than you can if your inventory is much broader and shallower. And it's only in the last couple of years that ASOS has ventured into Germany with a secondary stock holding.
But is it possible to go worldwide with one warehouse?
Yes, we did it.
Yeah.
And it's, I think one of the markets that we struggled with, under that model was China. But even China now, there are free trade zones where it's much easier to move parcels cross-border. And you're seeing specialists emerge in some countries. We've got one in the UK, which was founded by one of the guys who worked with us in ASOS. And this guy has built a business around just moving parcels cross-border and making that work as seamlessly as possible. And that massively de-risks international expansion because you're not having to double up on the inventory risk. Okay, you're incurring higher costs, but these are all incremental orders. So the way I used to think about it was, I don't need to make as much money on this order because all I'm doing is leveraging the infrastructure and the inventory that we already have.
But how long did it take until ASOS was profitable on the Nordic markets?
Well, this is where ASOS was different. Because we weren't spending any money on marketing, in those days free shipping wasn't as prevalent as it is now, and the customers were paying the shipping charge. We would calculate, it was an awful experience, but we would calculate what it was going to cost us at checkout, and then we'd add a little bit and charge that to the customer. So, we were profitable in the Nordics from the day we were profitable at ASOS, which would have been 2004.
But what about, we talked about returns today also a little bit. That must have been difficult for customers to understand even to do that, or?
Yeah, I'm an old timer, I guess. And again, this was back in the days when you didn't have to offer free returns. And we would see customers reselling stuff on eBay because that was cheaper than sending it back to us. We would see customers going to their local tailor and saying, hey, I've bought this £20 dress. Can you make it longer, shorter, bigger, wider? And maybe spending another £20 to actually make it fit. So yes,
that was good times.
The businesses were much smaller, but of course, we have to think much more carefully about these things now. And as we started to take the international expansion more seriously, we worked harder on putting returns hubs closer in market, free returns in. I think ASOS in the next few months is going free returns across Europe. Just to make that process as seamless as possible. And the other thing we worked hard on was understanding how long it would take the customer to get the refund. And in the markets that were further afield, like the US, like Australia, we would have returns processing centres, so the refund could be processed 3, 4, 5 days earlier than if we waited for that inventory to get back to the UK.
In what way did you obtain knowledge about the market? Did you hire people, or how did you do it?
We were based in London, and I don't think much like Stockholm. There's such a large international community in the market. We were able, as we were starting to take markets more seriously, we were able to hire people who were based in London but were nationals from those countries. So we hired people from France, from Germany, from the US, from Australia. And they were based in the office in London, giving us the insight we needed to start to serve that market better. And then, as a market got larger, we then started thinking about having people on the ground. And again, because we had sort of French, German, Australian, US nationals on the team already, it then made it easier to go into that market and find the right headhunters, and interview the right people, and ultimately find the right talent to help us build those markets.
What type of e-commerce companies will grow and enter the Nordic market in, say, 5 years from now?
The cross-border expansion is it's a really hot topic in the UK and has been for 3 or 4 years. It's becoming increasingly a hot topic in the US, and there are companies who specialize in just sort of handling the cross-border elements for you. And so, as these brands seek to expand and expand cross-border, I think they're obviously going to look at the Nordics because like we found 10 years ago, the Nordic customer is fluent in English, very international in their approach, and so in my experience, are very willing to accept the lower service levels that you get by shopping cross-border if they feel they're getting something in return, be that uniqueness, be that good value. You know, at ASOS, as we were building our international business, sterling was weak, and so our product was cheaper than a lot of the local competition. And so, if there's a point of difference that makes those products more attractive, for one reason or another, then competition is going to be more intense.
What key factors do Nordic players need to sustain in a global competition?
I've got a cartoon on my office wall, and it shows two very old retail executives, and they're looking at a declining sales chart, and one of them says to the other, "Well, Chairman, we've tried everything else. Maybe we should try getting the product right." And I think there's such a great history. I mean, some of the world's biggest and best retailers are out of the Nordics, right? And so just focusing on the fundamentals, great product, great price, great service. Actually it sounds trite, but I think if you focus on those fundamentals, then you can flourish anywhere.
But all companies do this kind of thing, that like we need to focus on customer service, customer experience.
They say it.
Yes, or say it.
They say it. I'm not sure your company.
No, we don't do anything about that. We don't even ship the products.
But everyone, the amount of times I go into a company and they talk about it and say, well, show me your customer satisfaction index, your NPS scores, and they go, well, we don't measure that. Well, so how do you know your customers are happy? Well, they tell us. Well, you need to measure it. You need to put tools in place. NPS is a good one. There are others, and really obsess about it. And we did this. I mean, we genuinely obsessed about this at ASOS, and it factors in. We didn't want to go free returns in as many markets as we want, but we felt that was the right thing to do for the customer. And I think luckily, lots of companies don't focus on these three things.
Yeah. So stay focused on the customer. We are so delighted to have you here, and we'll have more of you after our next speaker, so stay tuned. Thank you, Jon Kamaluddin.
Thank you.
I can take the mic. Oh, thank you.